The wind in the Wyoming Territory doesn't just bite, it carries ghosts. For Jedediah Stone, it carried the ghost of his wife, Annabelle. This Christmas Eve, like the 5 before it, was a day of reckoning, a tally of all he'd lost. He rode into the town of Redemption Creek with a heart as frozen as the ground, asking the frozen heavens for just one thing, an end to the loneliness. He didn't know that the 10:17 morning train, screeching to a halt against the snow, was about to deliver an answer he never could have anticipated, and a danger that would thaw his frozen world with fire. The air in Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, was thin and sharp enough to cut a man. It was December 24th, 1883, and the sky was a flat, unforgiving sheet of grey that promised more snow by nightfall. Jedediah "Jed" Stone felt the cold deep in his bones, a familiar ache that mirrored the one in his chest. He pulled his duster tighter, the worn wool smelling of horse, leather, and the faint, lingering scent of pine. He'd just spent an hour at the small, snow-drifted cemetery on the edge of town, standing before a simple wooden cross that read, "Annabelle and little Jedediah, gone to the Lord, 1878. 5 years, 5 Christmases spent reckoning with the what-ifs and the if-onlys. If only he hadn't pushed the cattle drive so hard. If only he'd been home when the blizzard hit. The official word, delivered by Doc Peabody, was that they'd been caught in the storm, lost their way from the small cabin, and frozen. Jed had found them, huddled together under a rocky overhang, looking like they were only sleeping. The guilt had been his constant companion ever since, a shadow darker than the Wyoming night. He'd made his wish there, at their grave. Not a real wish, but a muttered plea to the frozen earth. "Annabelle, I'm just so tired of being alone. Just send me a sign, anything." Now he was tying his horse, Buster, to the hitching post outside the general store. He needed coffee, cartridges, and a bag of oats. Then he'd ride back to his empty ranch, the broken S, drink himself numb, and wait for Christmas Day to pass. That's when he heard it. The long, mournful cry of the Union Pacific engine, cutting through the silence. The 10:17 from Laramie. It was almost always late in winter, and today was no exception. Jed paused, hand on Buster's mane. The train station was just across the street, a small wooden building with a single platform. Few people got off at Redemption Creek. Most were just passing through to the richer prospects in California or Oregon. A plume of black smoke and white steam billowed into the grey air as the massive engine screeched and hissed, its great iron wheels grinding to a halt. The baggage car door slid open, and a few wooden crates were unceremoniously tossed onto the platform. Then, the door to the passenger car opened. Jed wasn't a man given to staring, but he couldn't help it. She stepped down onto the platform as if she were stepping into a ballroom, not a frozen mud pit of a town. She was wrapped in a dark blue woolen coat that looked far too fine for this part of the world. A small, elegant hat perched on her dark chestnut hair. Even from across the street, Jed could see she was pale, her cheeks flushed bright red from the cold. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll, and utterly, terrifyingly lost. She clutched a single, scuffed leather valise and looked around. Her wide, green eyes that reminded him painfully of someone, darting from the Busted Spoke saloon to the livery stable. She was clearly looking for someone. Jed felt an unfamiliar, protective pang. She won't last a day here, he thought. His thought was interrupted by a reedy, unpleasant voice. "Miss Mayhew? Miss Eliza Mayhew?" Barnaby Finch, the town's bookkeeper and general lackey for its most powerful citizen, scurried forward. Finch was a small man in a threadbare suit, his shoulders permanently hunched, as if apologizing for the space he occupied. The woman, Eliza Mayhew, visibly composed herself. She lifted her chin. "I am. You are Mr. Finch, ma'am. Barnaby Finch. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Silas Croft." At the mention of that name, a visible tremor ran through the woman. Jed felt it too, like a sudden drop in temperature. Silas Croft. The name left a taste like rust in Jed's mouth. Croft owned the bank, the hotel, and the largest ranch in the valley, the Bar C. He was a man who collected things, land, cattle, and power. He was also the man who had tried to buy Jed's ranch, the Broken S, half a dozen times, using methods that were just barely on the right side of the law, and sometimes not even that. "Of course," Eliza said, her voice tight. "Mr. Croft." "He sends his deepest apologies, miss," Finch sputtered, grabbing her bag. "A pressing ranch matter keeps him. He has sent the buggy. If you'll please, follow me." Finch led her to a sleek, black buggy, pulled by two magnificent black horses, a stark contrast to the mud-caked ponies tied to the other posts. As Finch loaded her valise, Eliza turned for one last look at the town, her new home. Her gaze swept across the street and locked with Jed's. It was only for a second, but in that second, Jed saw past the porcelain beauty. He saw raw, undiluted panic. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of a doe caught in a hunter's trap. She broke contact first, turning gracefully and allowing Finch to help her into the buggy. The buggy snapped forward, cutting through the muddy street and heading north toward the vast, cold expanse of the Bar C Ranch. Jed stood frozen, the coffee and cartridges forgotten. Silas Croft wasn't just a rancher. He was a widower 3 times over. His wives had a habit of not lasting, and he was nearly 60. This girl couldn't have been more than 20. A mail-order bride, he realized, the pieces clicking into place. A Christmas present for a monster. He spat into the frozen mud. "Lord help you, Miss Eliza Mayhew," he muttered to the empty street. He hadn't realized it, but his hand was balled into a fist, his knuckles white. The wish he'd made at the grave, "Send me a sign," had been a moment of whiskey-fueled self-pity. But as he watched the black buggy disappear against the white snow, Jed Stone felt the first flicker of something other than grief he'd felt in 5 years. It felt a whole lot like rage. The ride to the Bar C Ranch was 5 miles of brutal, beautiful silence. Eliza Mayhew had never seen a land so vast or so empty. The snow-covered plains stretched into forever, ending only at the jagged, tooth-like peaks of the Teton Mountains. It was magnificent, but it was a cold, indifferent beauty. There was no comfort in it. Barnaby Finch, sensing her disquiet, tried to fill the silence. "Mr. Croft owns all this, you see," he said, gesturing with a gloved hand. "From the river to the ridge. Biggest cattle operation in the territory. You're a very lucky woman, ma'am. Very lucky." Eliza said nothing. She clutched the reticule in her lap, her fingers tracing the sharp, metal clasp. Inside was the telegraph message that had sealed her fate, sent to her boarding house in Philadelphia. "Miss Mayhew. Passage secured. Arrive 10:17. Laramie train. Deck 24. Buggy will meet you. We wed on Christmas Day. Your debt is paid. S. Croft. Your debt is paid." Those 4 words had been her damnation. After her father's death, she'd learned the horrifying truth. He had been a gambler, and he had left her and her younger brother Thomas with nothing but a mountain of IOUs held by dangerous men. She'd been given a choice: sell herself to a life of degradation in Philadelphia or answer an advertisement she'd seen in the paper. Wealthy, established Wyoming rancher seeks wife of good breeding and gentle constitution, all expenses paid, discretion assured. She had written, enclosed the only photograph she had, The reply from Silas Croft was swift. He knew of her father. He knew the men who held the debt. He offered to resolve her situation in exchange for her hand in marriage. It wasn't a proposal, it was a transaction. Now, as the buggy rounded a bend, she saw the ranch. It wasn't a ranch house, it was a fortress. The main lodge was a 2-story behemoth of dark, felled logs, with a wide, imposing porch and windows like vacant eyes. It was surrounded by a high fence, and the outbuildings, barns, bunkhouses, a blacksmith shop, were laid out with military precision. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys, but the place felt cold. The buggy stopped. A man walked out onto the porch. He was tall and broad, dressed not in cowboy denim, but in a fine, tailored wool suit, a heavy, fur-lined coat draped over his shoulders. His hair was a thick, distinguished silver, but his eyes, even from 20 yards, were dark and sharp. This was Silas Croft. "So," his voice boomed, a gravelly sound that seemed to shake the porch boards, "you have arrived." Finch scurried to help Eliza down, but Croft waved him off. "I will escort my fiancé, Barnaby. Go see to the horses, and tell Dawson I want to see him." Croft descended the steps, his boots making no sound on the packed snow. He stopped inches from her, staring down. She had to crane her neck to meet his gaze. "Eliza Mayhew," he stated. He did not smile. "You are paler than your photograph. The journey was difficult, I trust." "It was long, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It is Silas," he corrected her, taking her arm in a grip that was not gentle. "You will call me Silas. Come inside. You will meet the staff and prepare for dinner. We dine at 6. Punctuality is a virtue I prize." He led her inside. The interior was as imposing as the exterior. Dark wood, Navajo rugs, and the stuffed, glassy-eyed heads of deer, elk, and one massive buffalo stared down from the walls. A fire roared in a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, but it offered little warmth. A stern-looking woman in a black dress, Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, was summoned. "This is Mrs. Davies," Croft said. "She will show you to your room. She has her instructions. You will find a new wardrobe has been provided. The items you brought from the east will not be necessary." Eliza bristled. "My valise contains personal effects, Mr. Croft." "Silas," he corrected again. His eyes hardened. "And we will have no personal effects from your past life, Eliza. You are starting anew. Here, with me. Your old life is concluded. Do you understand me?" Eliza looked at his cold, possessive face. She thought of her brother, Thomas, safe in a boarding school back east, his tuition paid for the next 5 years by this man's money. She nodded, swallowing her pride. "I understand. Silas." "Good." He released her arm. 6 o'clock. Do not be late." Mrs. Davies, her face a mask of indifference, led Eliza up the massive staircase. "This will be your room, miss." It was a large, beautifully appointed room, a 4-poster bed, a velvet settee, a roaring fireplace, and laid out on the bed a gown of deep emerald green silk. It was beautiful, and it was a cage. She looked out the window. It faced north, overlooking the endless, snowy plains. There was no other ranch, no other house in sight. She was completely, utterly isolated. That evening at dinner, she learned the full extent of her prison. The dining table seated 20, but there were only 3 of them: herself, Silas, and his foreman, a quiet, brutal-looking man named Hank Dawson. Dawson had a long, puckered scar on his cheek and eyes that never seemed to blink. He ate his steak in silence, but Eliza felt his gaze on her, assessing. "Hank, here, runs the bar, see," Silas explained, swirling brandy in a glass. "He is my right hand, Eliza. His word is law to the men, and to you, when I am not present." Dawson nodded once, not looking at her. "Tomorrow, after the ceremony, we will host a small reception," Silas continued. "Sheriff Brody, Mr. Finch, the banker, the important people of Redemption Creek. You will be a gracious hostess." "A ceremony?" Eliza asked, her hands trembling. "So soon?" "Christmas Day," Silas smiled, and it was the most chilling expression she had ever seen. "What better day to receive the greatest gift? We will be wed by a circuit judge at noon. Mrs. Davies has your dress. It was my third wife's, a beautiful woman. Delicate, like you." A cold dread, heavier than the snow outside, settled over her. "What? What happened to your other wives, Silas?" Silas Croft took a sip of his brandy. "This is a hard land, Eliza. It takes its toll on delicate things. You will find, however, that I am very good at protecting my property." His eyes met hers, and the message was clear. She was not a wife. She was property. She thought of the man at the train station, the cowboy. He'd been rough-looking, his face weathered, but his eyes, when he'd looked at her, he'd looked at her like a person. She pushed the thought away. There was no help for her here. She had made her bed. Now, in this gilded cage, surrounded by the ghosts of other wives, she would have to lie in it. The next 3 days were a suffocating blur of preparation. Eliza was kept a virtual prisoner in the main house. Mrs. Davies was her shadow, a silent, disapproving warden. Silas Croft was busy with ranch affairs, overseeing his men as they rounded up cattle that had strayed in the early snows, but his presence dominated the house. Eliza learned the rules quickly. She was not to leave the house without an escort, either Dawson or Croft himself. She was not to speak to the ranch hands, and she was certainly not to go near the stables. On the morning of December 27th, 2 days after her wedding, Silas announced he and Dawson were riding to the far pastures to check on a herd. They would be gone until dark. "Mrs. Davies will see to your needs," he said, pulling on his heavy gloves. He paused and gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You are Mrs. Croft now. Behave as such." He kissed her, a dry, proprietary peck on the lips that made her skin crawl. The moment the sound of their horses faded, Eliza felt a desperate, suffocating panic. She had to get out, just for a moment. She waited until she saw Mrs. Davies in the kitchen, preoccupied with inventory. Eliza grabbed the old, practical wool shawl she had arrived in, one of the few items she'd managed to keep, and slipped out the back door. The air was sharp and clean. She ran, stumbling through the snow, past the bunkhouse and the blacksmith's forge, toward a small creek lined with frozen cottonwoods. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to be away. She finally stopped, gasping for breath, her lungs burning, a mile from the house. She was near the southern property line of the Bar C, a simple barbed wire fence that separated Croft's land from his neighbors. "It's not polite to run from your own home, Mum." The voice came from behind a thicket of pine. Eliza spun, her heart leaping into her throat. The cowboy from the train station was sitting on his horse, not 10 feet away. He was mending a break in the fence line. A spool of barbed wire was at his feet. "You startled me," Eliza said, clutching her shawl. "My apologies." He swung down from his horse. He was taller than she'd realized, and leaner, built of whipcord and steel. His eyes were a startling gray, the color of the winter sky. "Jedediah Stone," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "My place, the broken S, borders this one." "Eliza. Croft," she said, and the name tasted like ash. Jed's gaze was intense. "I saw you arrive, and I saw who met you." He didn't need to say more. "You look like you're a long way from home, Mrs. Croft." "I am," she whispered, a longer way than I ever imagined. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the caw of a raven. She shouldn't be talking to him. It was dangerous. Dawson or Croft could return, but she found she couldn't make herself leave. His presence was a small, warm spark in her frozen world. "You're not here to fix a fence, are you?" she asked, suddenly astute. Jed stopped his work, his gloved hands pausing on the wire. "No, Mum." He looked at her directly. I've been worried since I saw you at the station. Croft, he doesn't have a good history with... well, he doesn't." Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. She dashed them away angrily. "I am fine, Mr. Stone. I am exactly where I chose to be." "Choice is a funny word out here," Jed said quietly. "Sometimes it looks like a choice, but it's just a different kind of trap." He was so close to the truth it terrified her. She turned to go. "I must get back. My husband..." "Wait." His voice was gentle, but it stopped her. This is going to sound strange, but when you got off that train, I saw..." He seemed to be struggling for words. As she turned back, the movement pulled her shawl open. Her dress, a simple grey wool she wore for an acceptable daytime look, had a high collar. Tucked beneath it, on a simple leather thong, was a small wooden locket. Jed's breath hitched. His eyes, which had been soft and concerned, suddenly turned to flint. He took a step closer, his gaze fixed on the LV. "Where?" he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Did you get that?" Eliza's hand flew to her throat, covering the locket. It was a small, crudely carved thing, shaped like a bluebird, its paint faded. It was a gift," she stammered, frightened by his intensity. "A gift from who?" he demanded. He wasn't asking, he was accusing. My sister. My half-sister. She sent it to me years ago, before she..." Eliza's voice broke. "Before she died." Jed Stone looked as if she had struck him. He took another step, his hand reaching out, not to her, but to the locket. He didn't touch it, just hovered his fingers over the wood. "Her name," he breathed, his voice raw with an emotion Eliza couldn't place. "What was her name?" "Annabelle," Eliza whispered. "Her name was Annabelle. She married a rancher out here. She never told me his name. She just sent this. She said her new husband carved it for her. She died out here. In a blizzard, they said. 5 years ago." Jed closed his eyes. The color drained from his face, leaving it a mask of grey beneath his weathered skin. When he opened them, his eyes were filled with a terrible, consuming fire. He unbuttoned the cuff of his own shirt, pushing back the sleeve. On his wrist, tied with a matching leather thong, was an identical carving. A bluebird. "I carved them," Jed whispered, his voice shaking. "I carved them both. One for her, one for me. The week we were married." He looked up, and Eliza Mayhew finally understood. The trapped look in her eyes was not just her own. It was a reflection. "Annabelle," Jedediah Stone said, his voice breaking on the name, "was my wife." The world tilted. Eliza stumbled back, her hand pressed to her mouth. Your wife." "Annabelle Stone." Jed's voice was hollow. "She and our son. They died in the 78 blizzard. That's what they told me. I was on a cattle drive." "No," Eliza whispered, her mind racing. "No, that's not possible. She wrote to me, right before she died. Her letters, they were strange." "Strange how?" Jed stepped closer, his entire focus on her. The mended fence, the horse, the cold, it all disappeared. She never said she was unhappy. Not exactly. But she said she was watched. She called this valley a beautiful cage. She said, Eliza's brow furrowed, trying to recall the exact words from 5 years ago. She said, "The man who owns the valley, Mr. C, he doesn't like to lose." I thought she meant at cards, or something trivial. "Mr. C," Jed repeated, the name turning to poison on his tongue. Silas Croft. He wanted this land. He wanted her. The blood drained from Eliza's face. "What do you mean?" "Before I met Annabel, she worked for a short time as a governess in Laramie. Croft saw her there. He pursued her. She told me he frightened her. She turned him down, and he doesn't take no for an answer. When she married me, he acted like I'd stolen something from him. He tried to buy me out, tried to ruin me. When she died, he was the first one to offer his condolences, and his first one to make another offer on my land. The pieces were slotting into place, forming a picture so monstrous Eliza could barely look at it. He paid my father's debts," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "He sought me out. He knew I was Annabel's sister. This wasn't a random advertisement. He's replacing her," Jed finished, his voice raw. "With you." A new, terrifying thought struck Eliza. "Jed, what if it wasn't the blizzard?" Jed's face hardened into a mask of stone. He had lived with guilt for 5 years, but this new feeling, this cold, clarifying suspicion, was infinitely worse. "That's what I aim to find out." "How?" Eliza cried, her desperation returning. "That house, it's a fortress. Mrs. Davies, that foreman, Dawson, they're his eyes and ears. He told me my life back east was concluded. He told me he protects his property." "I know," Jed said, his mind already working. "Finch. Barnaby Finch. The bookkeeper? He's terrified of Croft." "Exactly. Men like Finch. They're cowards, but they're also meticulous. Croft is arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. But I'll wager every dollar he's ever stolen, swindled or extorted is written down in one of Finch's ledgers. If he paid someone to move Annabel, it'll be in there. Disguised, maybe. But it'll be there." "He keeps the ledgers in his study," Eliza said, her mind clearing, the fear being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "I've seen it. It's locked. Always." "The New Year's Eve party," Jed said, his eyes alight. "He's hosting one, bragging about his new wife. The whole town's important people will be there. Sheriff Brody, the banker. Finch will be there, sucking at his boot heels." "You're going to break in?" "While you're hosting," Jed said, "you'll have to keep him occupied. Keep everyone occupied." "And then what, Jed?" Eliza asked, the hopelessness of it crashing back down. "We find a note. We take it to Sheriff Brody. Brody works for him. The whole town does." "No," Jed said, his hand dropping to the Colt at his hip. "We're not taking it to Brody. We're taking it to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne. But I can't do that without proof. Undeniable proof. A ledger. A letter. Something." He looked at her, his grey eyes searching hers. This is not your fight, Eliza. You're his wife now. You could be in terrible danger." Eliza straightened. She thought of Annabel, dying alone in the cold, not by accident, but by design. She thought of herself, sold to this monster to pay a debt. "She was my sister, Jedediah," Eliza said, her voice clear and cold as the air. "It is exactly my fight. He didn't just buy a wife, he bought an enemy." She clutched the wooden bluebird locket. "What do I have to do?" "Just survive until New Year's, and find a way to get me a layout of that study, where he keeps the key, where the lockbox is. Anything." He keeps a spare key, she said, thinking hard. In his cigar humidor, on the mantel. I saw him use it once. Jed nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. Good. That's good. He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. I'll be in touch. I'll find a way. Jed, she called out as he turned to leave. He paused. Be careful. That foreman, Dawson. His eyes. They're the eyes of a killer. So are mine, Mrs. Croft, Jed said, his voice flat. So are mine. He kicked his horse into a trot, leaving her alone by the fence line, the cold seeping back into her bones. But this time it was different. It wasn't the cold of despair. It was the cold of vengeance. The 4 days between her meeting with Jed and the New Year's Eve party were the longest of Eliza's life. She played the part of the dutiful, subdued wife, earning faint, almost imperceptible approval from Silas. He paraded her around the ranch, forced her to sit with him as he went over accounts, and took a cruel pleasure in describing his power. You see, Eliza, he said one evening, gesturing to a map in his study, this valley is a closed system. The water flows from my mountains. The cattle feed on my grass. The men work in my pay. Nothing happens here that I do not will to happen. Eliza sat, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the humidor on the mantel. It must be a great comfort, she said, her voice a perfect blend of submission and admiration. He smiled, pleased. It is. Meanwhile, Jed was not idle. He rode into Redemption Creek, not as a grieving recluse, but as a man with a purpose. He went first to the Busted Spoke saloon. Hank Dawson was there at a corner table drinking whiskey. Jed walked straight to him. Dawson. Dawson looked up, his dead eyes taking in Jed. Stone, you're a long way from your wreck of a ranch. Just came to offer my congratulations to your boss, Jed said, leaning against the bar. On his new acquisition. Dawson's hand, which had been resting on the table, moved slowly to his lap, near his gun. The boss ain't here, and he don't need your congratulations. Oh, I think he does, Jed said, keeping his voice light. It's not every man who can replace what he's lost, or what other men have lost. Dawson stood up. He was shorter than Jed, but thicker, with the solid, immovable power of a bull. You're talking crazy, Stone, and you're talking yourself into a pine box. Am I? Jed smiled, a cold, thin smile. I was just thinking about that 78 blizzard. Terrible thing. Took my Annabelle. Funny. She was a strong walker. Knew the land. Hard to believe she'd get lost so easy. Unless she had help. The saloon went silent. The piano player stopped. Dawson's face was unreadable, but a muscle in his scarred cheek twitched. You keep talking about the dead, Stone. You're gonna join 'em. Just a thought. Jed tipped his hat. See you at the party. I hear I'm invited. He walked out, the saloon's doors swinging shut behind him, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. He hadn't been invited, but he knew Croft would be too arrogant to turn him away. He wanted to rattle Dawson, and he had. His next stop was Doc Peabody's office. The doctor, an older man with trembling hands and the smell of laudanum on his breath, looked up, startled. Jed, what can I do for you? You can tell me the truth, Doc, Jed said, closing the door. The truth? About what? About Annabelle. You were the one who signed the death certificate. Exposure. Peabody's face went pale. He sat down heavily. Jed, that was 5 years ago. It was a terrible tragedy. Was it? Jed leaned over the desk. Or was it a favor for Silas Croft? I know he holds the note on this building, Doc. I know he pays for your medicine. Now you tell me, did you even examine her? Peabody began to sweat. It was The blizzard, Jed. She was frozen solid. What was I to do? You were to do your job. Jed slammed his hand on the desk. Did you look for marks? For anything? The doctor broke. He buried his face in his shaking hands. I didn't, he sobbed. Dawson brought her in. Him and Croft. They said they'd found her. Croft, he just stared at me. I just signed the paper. I never even touched her, Jed. I'm sorry. God forgive me. I'm sorry. It was the confession Jed needed. It wasn't proof, but it was a compass. It pointed directly at Dawson and Croft. You'll keep this between us, Doc, Jed said, his voice quiet again. You're going to that party, and you're going to act like nothing's wrong. If you don't, Croft will be the least of your worries. The night of the party, December 31st, the Bar C Lodge was ablaze with light. A fiddler played in the great room. The important men of Redemption Creek were there with their wives, drinking Croft's expensive French brandy and eating beef carved from his prize steer. Eliza was a vision. She wore the emerald silk gown Silas had demanded, her hair pinned up, the bluebird locket hidden beneath the fabric. She was pale but composed, a perfect, beautiful statue by her husband's side. When Jedediah Stone walked in, a hush fell over the room. He was clean-shaven, but he wore his range clothes, his duster brushed clean, his gun belt conspicuously absent, as per the house rules. Silas Croft's eyes narrowed. Stone, I don't recall an invitation. Neighborly duty, Croft, Jed said, his voice carrying through the room. Came to wish you and the new missus a happy new year. It's a time for new beginnings, isn't it? Croft's lip curled. Indeed. Enjoy the brandy. Don't get lost on your way home. The threat was obvious. Jed nodded and moved toward the fireplace, grabbing a drink. His eyes met Eliza's across the room. The humidor. The party wore on. 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Eliza, seeing her chance, accidentally, stumbled near the fireplace, jostling a nervous-looking Barnaby Finch. "Oh, Mr. Finch, how clumsy of me!" she exclaimed. "I've spilled brandy on your sleeve." As Finch fussed and Silas bellowed for a towel, Eliza's hand darted to the humidor. She didn't take the key. She unlocked the study door, which was just behind the fireplace, obscured by a heavy curtain. She pushed it open a fraction of an inch. She caught Jed's eye and gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. Jed waited. At 11:30, he made his move. He approached Doc Peabody, who was already deep in his cups. "Doc," Jed said loudly, "you don't look so good. Let's get you some air." He steered the stumbling doctor towards the curtain, pushed him through, and slipped into the study behind him, pulling the door shut. "Jed, what?" The doctor slurred. "Shut up, Doc." Jed lit the desk lamp. The room was lined with books, the desk massive. "Stay by the door. If you hear anyone, cough." He went straight to the desk. It was locked. He used a knife from his boot to jimmy the rudimentary lock. Inside, ledgers. Dozens of them. Bar C payroll, 1883. Bar C expenses, 1883. He flipped back. 1882, 1881, 1880, 1879, 1878. He opened the expenses. 1878 ledger. His hands were shaking. He ran his finger down the columns. Feed, wire, saloon, bunkhouse, wages, and then he saw it. An entry from the week after Annabelle's death. H. Dawson. Bonus, $500. $500. More than a man like Dawson would make in 2 years. It was a massive sum, but it wasn't proof of murder. "Jed!" Peabody hissed from the door. "Wait!" Jed's eyes scanned the desk. There was a smaller, leather-bound book. A personal ledger. It was also locked. This lock was better. He couldn't force it. He looked around the room. He saw the fire poker. He jammed it into the drawers frame and pulled, the sound of splintering wood echoing in the small room. Inside was the ledger, and underneath it, a small pine box. He opened the ledger. It was in Croft's own hand. Arrogant, precise. And there it was. December 1878. H. Dawson. Services rendered $500. A.S. Matter. A.S. Annabel Stone. Jed felt the blood roar in his ears. He opened the pine box. Inside, on a bed of velvet, was a length of dark chestnut hair, tied with a blue ribbon, and beside it, a small woman's glove. He recognized it. He'd bought them for Annabel in Laramie. He kept souvenirs, Jed whispered, his stomach turning. This was the proof. This was the sickness. "Jed! Someone's coming!" Peabody yelped. The main door to the study burst open. But it wasn't Croft. It was Barnaby Finch. His face was white as a sheet. He knows. Dawson. He saw you. "Finch, get out of the way," Jed said, grabbing the box and the ledger. "No, listen." Finch was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "He's not just a bully. He's a monster. That $500. It wasn't the first time. My sister, she worked here, before your wife, as a maid. She wouldn't have him. And she disappeared." Finch pointed a trembling finger at a loose floorboard under the desk. "Not that one. That's the fake. The real one. The one he thinks I don't know about. It's under the desk." Jed shoved the desk aside. He pulled up the floorboard. Inside was another, larger metal box. He opened it. It was full of letters, and Jed saw Annabel's handwriting. They were letters to him, letters he'd never received, frantic, terrified letters. "Jed, come home. Croft won't leave me alone. He says I belong to him. He says if he can't have me, no one can. I'm afraid. Hank Dawson watches the house." The last letter was dated the day before the blizzard. "Jed, my love, he knows you're coming home. He said he's going to solve his problem before you get back. I'm taking little Jed. We're running. We're going to the old line cabin. It ended there. She hadn't been caught in the storm. She'd been running to safety, and Dawson had found her." "Midnight," Finch whispered. "The new year." A gunshot echoed from the great room, followed by Eliza's scream. Jed's blood ran cold. He shoved the letters and the ledger into his duster, grabbed the pine box, and burst out of the study, Peabody and Finch tumbling out behind him. The party had devolved into chaos. Silas Croft stood by the massive, dying Christmas tree, a smoking pistol in his hand. Hank Dawson was by his side, gun drawn, and across the room, near the front door, Eliza was on the floor, her emerald dress stained. Sheriff Brody was holding a bloody arm, his gun on the floor. You shot me, Silas," Brody gasped, his face a mask of disbelief. "You were always a weak link, Sheriff," Croft sneered, his mask of civility gone, revealing the predator beneath. "I saw you watching Stone. I saw you talking to him." He turned his cold eyes to Jed. "And you sanctimonious, grave-digging fool. You should have stayed on your frozen scrap of land." "Jed!" Eliza cried, struggling to her feet. She wasn't shot. The blood was Brody's. "What did you find, Stone?" Croft asked, his voice calm, terrifying. "My little trophies, my ledgers, it doesn't matter. No one is leaving this room. Dawson, secure the door. The rest of you, this is a private matter." "My wife," he spat the word, "has conspired with this peasant to defame me." "He murdered her," Jed said, his voice quiet, but it cut through the room. The music stopped. The townsfolk stared, trapped. "He murdered Annabel and little Jed." Jed held up the pine box. "And you kept souvenirs." The color drained from the faces of the bankers and their wives. This was not the civilized Mr. Croft they knew. "Lies," Croft said. "Is it?" Jed threw the personal ledger onto the floor. It skidded to a halt near the banker's feet. Page 47. A.S. matter. And then there are the letters, Silas. The ones you stole from her. The ones she wrote to me, begging for help. Dawson, Croft said, his voice losing its calm. Kill him. Dawson raised his pistol, but before he could fire, Eliza did the one thing no one expected. She grabbed the massive half-empty crystal brandy decanter from a side table and smashed it over Silas Croft's head. Croft roared, stumbling, his shot going wild into the ceiling. "Run, Jed!" Eliza screamed. Jed didn't run. He lunged, not at Croft, but at Dawson. He tackled the foreman, the two men crashing through the food-laden table and onto the floor, a tangle of limbs, broken glass, and rage. Dawson was built like an ox. He grunted, slamming his fist into Jed's side, trying to bring his gun around. Jed, fueled by 5 years of guilt and a white-hot, clarifying rage, drove his elbow into Dawson's throat. Dawson choked, his grip loosening. Jed grabbed the man's gun hand and slammed it against the stone floor until the pistol skittered away. "You killed my son!" Jed roared, his hands closing around Dawson's thick neck. "Silas paid me!" Dawson choked, his face turning purple. He said just to scare her. Make her come to him. But she ran, with the kid, into the storm. I just followed her, Jed. I found her, at the cabin. She wouldn't come. She fought. It was a confession, sputtered out in a torrent of fear and pain. And the boy, Jed's voice was barely human. He was small. The cold. It was easy. Jed bellowed, a sound of pure animalistic grief, and raised his fist. "Jed, don't!" Eliza's voice cut through his rage. "Don't! Not like this! He has to hang! They have to hang!" Jed froze, his fist trembling inches from Dawson's face. He looked up. Silas Croft was on one knee, blood streaming from his temple, trying to aim his pistol. The party guests were screaming, huddled against the far wall. And Barnaby Finch. Barnaby Finch was standing by the door, holding a loaded shotgun. It was one of the guns Croft kept mounted on the wall. "It's over, Mr. Croft," Finch said, his voice shaking, but his aim steady. "For Annabel. And for my sister, Mary." Croft stared at his bookkeeper, his face a mask of contemptuous disbelief. You worm." The front door burst open. It wasn't more of Croft's men. It was 6 ranch hands from the bunkhouse, drawn by the gunshots. They stopped, taking in the scene. The bleeding sheriff, the ruined party, their boss on one knee, and the town's bookkeeper holding a shotgun on him. He murdered them," Jed said, standing up, dragging the choking Dawson with him. "He murdered my wife. He murdered Finch's sister. He shot the sheriff." The ranch hands looked at each other. They were paid by Croft, but they were cowboys. They were hard men. But most were not murderers. "Jed's right," Doc Peabody slurred, finding a sudden, drunken courage. I lied on the death certificate. Croft made me. Dawson brought her in. It was murder." The tide turned. It was a visible, crashing wave of realization. The power in the valley had just shifted. "Seize him," Jed ordered the ranch hands, pointing at Croft. After a long, tense moment, 2 of the cowboys stepped forward. They looked at Croft, then at the ledger, then at the damning, tiny glove Jed held up. "Sorry, boss," one of them muttered. He took the pistol from Croft's limp hand. It was over. "Jed, don't!" Eliza's voice cut through his rage. "Don't! Not like this! He has to hang! They have to hang!" "Midnight," Finch whispered. "It's Christmas." The front door burst open. "Seize him," Jed ordered the ranch hands, pointing at Croft. "Sorry, boss," one of them muttered. He took the pistol from Croft's limp hand. It was over. Christmas had come. By the time the weak, grey light of Christmas morning filtered into the valley, the world had been remade. Silas Croft and Hank Dawson were bound tight to chairs in the lodge's great room, the shattered remnants of the party surrounding them like a battlefield. The important men of Redemption Creek, their wives having been escorted to a separate room, were now serving as a grim, silent jury, their complicity in Croft's reign laid bare. Jed stood by the window, the letters, Annabel's letters, in his hand. He had read them all. Each one was a fresh knife in his heart, a testament to her terror and her love. But with the pain came a strange, burning peace. The guilt, the shadow he had lived with for 5 years, was gone. It had been replaced by a righteous, cleansing anger, and now by a profound, hollow emptiness. Eliza approached him. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her emerald dress torn at the hem. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. What happens now, Jed?" she asked softly. "Now," Jed said, looking at the prisoners, "we wait for the marshal. I sent one of the hands to ride to Laramie. He's to telegraph Cheyenne, with Doc Peabody's testimony and Finch's, and these—" He held up the letters and the ledger. "They'll hang." And us?" she asked, her voice small. Jed turned to her. He saw so much of Annabel in her face, the same strength, the same green eyes. But she was not Annabel. She was Eliza, and she was free. "The 10:17, he said. "We'll be here in an hour. It's Christmas Day. But the train runs. You can be on it. You can go back to Philadelphia, back to your brother. You can be free of all of this." Eliza looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Is that what you want?" Jed's gaze dropped. What I wanted, was to not be alone. I made a wish yesterday, at her grave. It seems like a lifetime ago." He sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of the night. "This isn't your life, Eliza. This valley, it's poisoned." "Land isn't poisoned, Jed," she said, stepping closer. "People are, and the poison is being cut out." She touched his arm, her fingers light on his rough duster. "My sister. She sent me that locket. I think I was always meant to come here, not for him," she glanced at Croft with disgust, "but to find the truth, to find you." The distant, mournful wail of the 10:17 echoed through the valley. The morning train. Jed looked at the sound, then back at her. "Eliza, I'm a broken man. My ranch is half dead. My heart—" "Your heart," she interrupted gently, "is healing, and a ranch can be rebuilt. We could rebuild it together." She was, he realized, his Christmas wish. Not a ghost, not a replacement, but a new beginning. A second chance, delivered by the morning train. He reached up and touched the locket, her locket, which she'd pulled from beneath her dress. "Annabel, she would have loved you." "I know," Eliza whispered. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but of quiet, profound recognition. It was a kiss that tasted of loss and redemption and the promise of a cold, clear Christmas morning. When the train screeched to a halt at the Redemption Creek station, Eliza Mayhew was not on it. She was standing on the porch of the Bar C Ranch, her ranch now, the U.S. Marshal would later decide, in recompense, watching as Jedediah Stone and 2 deputies loaded a shackled Silas Croft and Hank Dawson into a prison wagon bound for the gallows in Cheyenne. As the wagon pulled away, Jed walked back to the porch. He stopped in front of her. He didn't know what to say. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Stone," she said, a small, true smile finally reaching her eyes. Jedediah Stone looked at this woman, the sister of his lost wife, the woman who had saved his life and his soul. He took her hand, his calloused palm enveloping hers. "Merry Christmas, Eliza." He led her inside, away from the cold, and for the first time in 5 years, Jed Stone felt the warmth of home. The snows of Christmas finally brought a cleansing to Redemption Creek. They buried the sins of Silas Croft and thawed the frozen heart of Jedediah Stone. His wish, muttered in a lonely graveyard, came true, not with magic, but with courage. Eliza, who arrived as a prisoner, found her strength, her justice, and her future, all by refusing to be a victim. Theirs is a story that proves that even in the darkest, coldest winter, the truth can burn bright, and love can be the warmest fire of all. What did you think of Jed and Eliza's story? Does a man like Silas Croft deserve any pity? Let us know in the comments below. Your stories and ideas help us create more videos just like this one. If you are on the edge of your seat, please like this video, share it with a friend who loves a good Western drama, and be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss the next story we have waiting for you.